No, not really. Pokemon designs have been quote-unquote forgettable for as long as Pokemon's been around. But as Pokemon grows, there is less of an incentive to remember certain designs like Thievul or Pangoro, since now there's over 1,000 of them to care about. But let's start at the beginning. Let's see when this started happening. When did Pokemon become forgettable? Everyone knows the history of Pokemon, the little bug-collecting dreams of one Satoshi Tajiri that evolved into the massive Pokemania of the 90s, and simply is now the biggest media franchise in the world. It has grown too big to fail is a phrase that has become all too common when talking about modern Pokemon controversies, and we'll hear it more as we delve into this franchise's future. But in the first generation of Pokemon, the marketing for these little monsters was powerful and everywhere. There was a reason that most people familiar with Nintendo will know most of the original 151, if not all of them. They were impossible to miss. Characters such as Pikachu, Charizard, and Mewtwo became staples almost immediately. Even the lesser-known Pokemon were getting merch. There was also spin-off games such as Pokemon Snap or Stadium, giving the casual Pokemon enjoyers more ways to immerse themselves in the world of Pokemon. There's also the unforgettable anime, allowing kids to learn more about Kanto and what monstrous inhabitants it has without having to play the games. That's why they're still memorable today. Every avenue you could think had something Pokemon. It was inescapable. Those original 151 are stuck in your head. The marketing for Gen 2 was less heavy-handed, riding a bit off the first generation's popularity. Gold and Silver were in fact meant to be direct sequels of the first game and finish off the whole series. That's part of the reason why Gen 2 is kinda hard to remember sometimes. It comes as a package deal with its predecessor. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if most people thought Wooper or Sudowoodo were Pokemon from the first generation. And now, almost immediately into the franchise's lifespan, we already see that Pokemon are being forgotten. Stantler, Smeargle, and Snubbull have some niche fans who favorite them, but there's simply no Grimer, Gengar, or Gloom. The side content for Gen 2 was also waning. Pokemon Stadium 2 is really the only one of note that I can think of off the top of my head, and that lacks the all-around casual appeal that something like Snap had. The Pokemon anime was still going strong though. It wasn't as big as its first two seasons, but keeping up with it is still a good way to keep up with the series as a whole, and it will stay that way for quite some time. Going on into the future, Pokemon knew that it was going to last a little bit longer than 2 generations, so the marketing for future generations would start making them more of their own original experiences. Gen 3 and 4 both include older Pokemon, but have obvious priority and favoritism to showing off their new stuff that they have to offer. And because of that, Gens 3 and 4 are easily fan favorites. Not everyone can confidently say what generation fur it is, but Lucario or Ludicolo are very easy to place in their respective generations. And especially Lucario, who was marketed like crazy, quickly becoming another face of Pokemon not seen since the likes of Mewtwo. These generations are the peak of what I'd like to call classic Pokemon in my mind, and capped off this era as unforgettable in Pokemon fans' minds. It's still not as big as Gen 1, and your grandma probably won't be able to name Dusclops, but as far as casual Pokemon fans are aware, they could still name these newer Pokemon fairly easily. That's in part to the ever-present Pokemon anime, but also to the myriad of spin-offs that continue to expand these games' specific generations. Pokemon Ranger, Pokemon Colosseum, Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness, and the first Pokemon Mystery Dungeon games were all 3rd generation and were able to seamlessly mix the first 3 generations of Pokemon together and make them feel cohesive without one generation overshadowing one another. Whereas Pokepark, Mystery Dungeon Explorers of the Sky, or Pokemon Rumble give the 4th generation a similar treatment, letting Pokemon feel like they all live in the same world. The first 4 generations were really nice and cohesive, and that's probably why a lot of people consider it to be the peak of the franchise. Now that sentence probably got some people's blood boiling, as the following generation is also a fan favorite, and probably has a stronger online presence than the others. That's because with the 5th generation of Pokemon, they made a bold decision to split the fan base. They drew a line in the sand. This will be a new start to Pokemon. With the cohesiveness of the last 4 generations tossed aside, it no longer felt like you have to know all 500 Pokemon. To make up for that, they decided to add an unprecedented 155 new Pokemon this generation, and this allowed people to get a fresh start on Pokemon if they wanted. And even when you beat the game, you could still use the old ones. You just had to get acquainted with the likes of Zoroark or Zebstrika first. This even extended to the side content and merchandise. Spin-off games like Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Gates to Eternity, Pokepark 2, and Pokemon Rumble Blast all gave more authority to these 5th generation Pokemon. It was a breath of fresh air for the franchise as they could shake off the added weight of the other generations. Even the anime was able to switch up the formula a bit. This didn't go over well though. As you'd imagine, seeing the Pokemon Company raise up these new Pokemon as your new friends and pushing the others to the side, it didn't really sit well with some fans. This led to a very controversial generation. The ideas that Pokemon designs are lazy now, or nobody cares about the ice cream Pokemon, flew left and right like a barrage of bullets. You had to dodge the toxicity everywhere if you wanted to enjoy the likes of Reshiram. Or for me, you can be 9 years old and not know anything about the online toxicity. Both ways work. These games being such a new step for Pokemon to take, and really hammering home these new Pokemon as cool little guys that you had to know, it suddenly failed for Pokemon. And going forward, to fix this, they would take a couple huge steps backward that we're still feeling the effects of today. But something that Game Freak didn't realize was how much this design sensibility that they had for Gen 5 would pay off in the long run. But we'll get to that later. For now, we have officially what I would call modern Pokemon. And this is where all the problems start to rear their ugly heads. As I said before, all of the Gen 5 controversy made Game Freak, and in fact the whole Pokemon Company, take a step back and think, what's the thing that everyone liked about Pokemon? And the answer was looking back to their most popular Pokemon generation, and the one everyone knows. Generation 1. This is a step in the wrong direction. And I don't think it's a step that they'll ever rethink, because it worked really, really well. Looking at the financial side, Gen 6, 7, 8, and 9 are all huge moneymakers compared to almost all the previous generations, only losing to the intense hype of Gen 1. Money talks, and with Pokemon growing, they've become too big to fail. But let's get back to the wider picture. With the 6th generation of Pokemon and pretty much every generation afterwards, Pokemon started looking back more than they looked forward. Gen 2 and Gen 4 still have Pokemon like Magby or Magmortar that took older Pokemon and gave them a new step in their evolution line. It was mixed in with primarily new Pokemon, so it didn't crowd the generation too much. But as we move on to Gen 6, they took this idea and kind of twisted it. Because you see, now we have Mega Evolution, a first of these Pokemon gimmicks that would go on to be the driving force of future games. To be fair, I really like Mega Evolution. It's fun to play with, and I don't necessarily think it never should have been invented. It's just a good representation of the direction Pokemon's going in, and fits into place pretty well. Almost every Pokemon in X and Y that got a Mega were from Gen 1. A lot of the game puts this first generation of Pokemon in the forefront and forgets about its own new Pokemon. And therefore, people did too. Who needs a Romatisse when you can play with Aerodactyl, a Pokemon you already know and who just got a new form? Gen 6 still has popular Pokemon like Greninja, but Greninja's an outlier in a primarily overshadowed generation. Even just shooting a couple Pokemon off the top of my head, I can think of Binacle, I can think of Clawitzer, or like the starters. But as you can see, it's not as easy as being like, oh, Mega Ampharos, oh, Mega Kangaskhan, oh, Mega Starters. You see, like, it's a problem. With a Pokedex filled to the brim with old Pokemon and so many new memorable forms, the Gen 6 Pokemon are stuck between a rock and a hard place. Even looking at the spin-offs, a place where new Pokemon could show their worth and a new adventure, are overshadowed by older Pokemon. Just look at the box arts. It's so sad that Super Mystery Dungeon barely features Gen 6 Pokemon. And besides Super Mystery Dungeon, there's no more side games of note. So Gen 6 Pokemon don't even get to shine there either. We haven't gotten a new Mystery Dungeon since then, and the effect is really felt. Those games let weird Pokemon like Kecleon shine. Being able to talk to Pokemon and hear what they had to say gave these creatures so much more personality than just seeing them in the game. It's what gives these little guys a shot in the spotlight. Without that, they're just stuck backstage. Even the anime went back to the nostalgic intro from Season 1, and because of Mega Evolution, older Pokemon still got a spotlight there. Granted, you would know who Malamar is, but you would care more about Mega Charizard X than you would Malamar. Starting in Gen 7, they introduced Alolan forms, which moved on to be Galarian forms, Hisuian forms, and so on and so forth. This is another way to overshadow new Pokemon. In this time, it was literally all Gen 1, and other forms are still an addition I like, but it still illustrates my point well. Z-moves were also added, and primarily given to 7th generation Pokemon this time, so that is a nice change of pace. But it's all just stamped out as Gens 8 and Gens 9 came into the picture, where this is the absolute worst. Gen 8 had Galarian forms and Gigantamax forms, even more ways to celebrate old Pokemon and forget the new ones. And Gen 9 had every single gym leader walk around with old Pokemon as their ace to show off terrestrialization. Now, as you play through the game, you don't even get to properly experience these new Pokemon as you battle the bosses. Their main Pokemon are Sudowoodo or Staraptor. And, again, Paradox forms let you live out your dreams of using old Pokemon with a new coat of paint. And again, it's another addition I like, but I'm a Pokemon shill, so you just kinda had to let me have this. I hope my point has been properly illustrated. Pokemon designs are not forgettable. The last few generations have introduced new Pokemon that I think are my absolute favorites. I even think Pokemon in general has only gotten better at designing Pokemon as the years go on, but they're just simply overshadowed by the Pokemon Company's insistence to make another version of Gengar. It's a toxic design philosophy that just drains this franchise dry. Not to mention the games are kinda bad now, but that's a topic for later discussion. What caused this? Them taking a risk in 2011 that they didn't think paid off? But that's just it. Look at Gen 5 fans now, it's one of their most popular generations. And why is that? It's because they let new Pokemon shine. They let people get attached to the likes of Garbodor by giving him a chance, instead of having him sit in the shadow of something like a Mega Muck. Their decision paid off, but they didn't trust themselves to give Gen 5 the time to prove itself. Now, let's look to the future. It may look bad, but that's just the current perspective. It looked bad in Gen 5 too. That's what nostalgia does. Maybe in the future generations, people will look at Gen 6 or 7 with the same level of love. Maybe we will finally get some new Pokemon spin-offs that feature really cool Pokemon from the last few generations, like Toxtricity, Scoville, or Crabrawler. That'd be a fairly easy way to let people grow up and get attached to these Pokemon. See them as something more than a cool-looking 3D model. The future is kinda bright, but it's hard to see it over this cartoon stench cloud that's been lifting off the franchise for the past couple years. And it's just kind of disappointing.